something like the silent flute or equivalent to that. And then the letter I got the next month, he would tell me that that fell through because in one instance he told me that they just felt that a young Asian couldn't carry the lead in something like that.
Undeterred, the young man forges on. He conceives an idea for a television series that will feature martial art philosophy, originally to be called The Warrior, but later renamed Kung Fu.
Even when he conceived the idea of the Kung Fu series, had many planning discussions with the eventual producers of the Kung Fu series, when it got right down to it, they did not hire Bruce to play the part of the leading part in Kung Fu, instead going for a Caucasian man. And the word was that Bruce, because he was Chinese, was not considered a bankable commodity.
Let me ask you, however, about the problems that you face as a Chinese hero in an American series. Have people come up in the industry and said, well, we don't know how the audience are going to take a non-American?
Well, such question has been raised. In fact, it is being discussed, and that is why The Warrior is not going to be on.
I see.
You see, because unfortunately, such thing does exist in this world, you see, like, I don't know, certain part of the country, right? Where, like, they think that business-wise, it's a risk. And I don't blame them, I mean, in the same way, it's like in Hong Kong, if a foreigner come and became a star, if I were the man with the money, I probably would have my own worry of whether or not the acceptance would be there. But that's all right, because if you honestly express yourself, it doesn't matter, see?
Lee now realizes that Hollywood only wants Asians to play grossly inaccurate stereotypes. Despite his dire economic circumstances, he refuses to accept roles that would portray the Chinese race as anything less than equal to other cultures. With a wife and now 2 small children to support, Lee's dignity and philosophical principles come at a huge price. With money rapidly running out, he now realizes that he is wasting his time with Hollywood.
Here I am with a Chinese, not prejudice or anything, but in realistic thinking. How many times in film is a Chinese required? Right. And when it is required, it is always branded as the typical, type, you know what I mean? Right. So I say, hell with it.
With that rejection in mind, I guess you could say that was an overt expression of racism in the film industry in the early 70s. And at that time, we went to Hong Kong, Bruce having decided that if he couldn't make it in the American film industry through the front door, he would go to Hong Kong and come back in through the side door, which is precisely what he was doing.
At the time, Chinese action films were largely swordplay films, or, as Bruce Lee so aptly described them, simply one long, armed hassle.
He would say he didn't invent the gore in Mandarin films, but that the violence in his films were always with just cause.
I hope that the picture I am in would either explain why the violence was done, whether right or wrong or whatnot. But unfortunately, pictures, most of them here, are done mainly just for the sake of violence. You know what I mean? Like, fighting for 30 minutes, get stabbed 50 times.
Well, I'm fascinated. Let me give you your microphone back. I'm fascinated that you came back.
I am a martial artist.
He's offered very little money to star in his first film, but then money has never been his sole objective. The film is entitled The Big Boss, and it will become the highest-grossing film in Southeast Asian history. Lee follows up the unprecedented success of his first film with a second, Fist of Fury. It proceeds to smash the records set by The Big Boss.
Bruce didn't want to be segmented in that he could only do Chinese movies or only do Chinese martial arts. He didn't view himself as only a Chinese man. He viewed himself as a citizen of the world who had a mission that really had nothing to do with what his nationality was. He wanted to bring his views of martial arts and of life and of the culture that he had experienced in his short lifetime to the audiences all over the world.
Lee does just this with his next film, The Way of the Dragon, which he also directs. In the film's climactic battle, Lee takes on one-time student Chuck Norris in a fight set in the Roman Colosseum. Lee's character, using classical gung fu techniques, is losing the fight until he begins to employ the formless and adaptive approach of Jeet Kune Do. The Way of the Dragon also affords Lee the opportunity to include deeper elements of his personal philosophy of life. After reluctantly taking the life of his adversary in the film, Lee's character pauses to make a symbolic gesture of respect to a fellow human being. It was yet another example of Bruce Lee communicating to his audience a piece of his own personal philosophy regarding the brotherhood of all races.
After the first two movies, then Bruce progressed into making The Way of the Dragon, which was his own creation, then Game of Death, of course, and then Enter the Dragon came along. And I think, as you can see, there's a progression in those films where the fighting has even more justification and that there's more material built around the fighting to explain, first of all, the reason for it, and to also find expression for the philosophy underlying the martial arts.
Do I bother you?
Don't waste yourself.
What's your style?
My style? You can call it the art of fighting without fighting.
The art of fighting without fighting? Show me some of it.
Later. All right. Don't you think we need more room?
Where else?
That island, on a beach. We can take this boat.
Okay. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Hey, are you crazy? Pull me in! Pull me in!
After filming Enter the Dragon, Lee is now ready to complete the film that will embody his greatest message, a film Lee calls The Game of Death.
I believe that this background of research and the building of a philosophy of Jeet Kune Do is what Bruce intended to relate through The Game of Death. He had an idea of how he wanted to show the martial arts to the viewing public. These various steps in finding your own way in martial arts, the different styles and what styles mean, and more importantly, what they don't mean. That was Bruce's big message, the style of no style. And Game of Death was going to be the platform for these expressions.
While we may never know how the film would have turned out had Bruce Lee lived, we do know with unimpeachable certainty the vision that he had for the movie during the time he was filming its finale. According to Lee's 12-page storyline, he would play a retired, undefeated martial arts champion by the name of Hai Tien, who had been approached by members of the Korean underworld to take part in a daring raid on a 5-story pagoda said to contain a valuable treasure on its uppermost level. When he refuses to participate, his sister and younger brother are kidnapped, leaving him no option but to take part in the raid. At a briefing at the boss's home, Hai Tien is introduced to his accomplices in the raid, all of them highly trained martial artists. The boss screens a reconnaissance film of the temple area, explaining to the accomplices that since guns are prohibited in the village, the pagoda is guarded by martial arts mercenaries, one on each level of the pagoda.